There are two theories about where the word religion comes from. I'm not going to try to pronounce the Latin roots, but one of them means to bind together. So it's the same root that gives us ligature and ligament. Religion is the thing we do that binds us together. The other possible origin of the word comes from the word to contemplate or to reread. That the act of religion is to reread the same things over and over and contemplate them. And we see that in many religions, whether it's the Eightfold Path or the Torah or the Vedas or the Quran. Religious community is bound together by rereading. And as Unitarian Universalists, our truth is not in a certain book or a handy list, but we are bound together by the things we contemplate or reread or return to again and again, whether that's a chalice lighting or a flower service or the act of being together and sharing the milestones of our lives. So today, I'm focusing my reflection on the rereading, because over the last months, my 7-year-old has gotten fascinated by Greek mythology, and I was fascinated by the same topic at the same age. And it's this act of rereading is holy work that I know that all of us engage with in different ways, in different times. So come, let us gather. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to People's Church. Whether this is your first time at People's Church or you come every Sunday or anywhere in between, whether you're joining us in person, on Zoom, or watching the recorded service on YouTube, I welcome you. My name is Laura McClellan, and I'm from the Sunday Services Committee. People's Church is a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association and part of a tradition of liberal religion. Here, our mission is to be a beloved community, embracing and serving our diverse world. Thank you for joining us this morning. We welcome all at our doors, the joyful and the heartbroken, atheists and Christians, Muslims and Jews, straight and gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, all who are searching, seeking, looking for more meaning, more service, more love. All of us gathered here together to walk each other home. Our summer services are a bit different. After the reflection, we will discuss in the group the discussion questions related to Rachel's reflection. People in person and on Zoom are invited to speak. Welcome, everyone.
Good morning. I invite you to rise, embody your spirit to sing together. Our opening song is number 368 in your gray book, Now Let Us Sing. There are two parts to this song. Why don't we sing that first part real quick? So the low part goes, yep. Now let us sing, 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 sing. Now let us sing, 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 sing. Lift up your voice. I hear some people, yep. Be not afraid. Now let us sing to the power of the faith within. Yeah, so that's how that goes. And I'm going to be singing the melody. So why don't we get going here? I'll start the low part. We go 1, 2. Now let us sing to the power of the faith within. Sing to the power of the faith within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the faith within. Sing to the power Sing to the power of the hope within. Sing to the power of the love within. Sing to the power of the love within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the hope within. Last one, joy. Sing to the power of the joy within. Sing to the power of the joy within. Lift up your voice, be not afraid. Sing to the power of the joy within.
We Kindle This Flame by Philip Randall Giles. We kindle this flame as a symbol of the light we would keep glowing in our lives, of appreciation for those who differ, loving kindness for those who suffer, esteem for all who remind us of our heritage and calling as agents of the Most High.
In addition to our chalice lit here at People's Church, we have chalices kindled this morning in Galesburg, in Portage, and in Richland Township. And in Friendship Village, and in Battle Creek, and in West Edge Hill. They're coming in. I love this. This way we can feel connected across space. So my story for you all this morning is an old story. It is the story about the beginning of people. So Zeus, the king of the gods and the god of thunder, decided there should be humans. And so he tasked two other gods, Epimetheus and Prometheus, with doing the work of creating humans and animals. And Epimetheus got right to work, creating all of the animals. And he put sharp teeth and stripes in the tiger, and gave the eagle wings and claws, and picked out the colors of all the different butterflies. He was very diligent about this task. And by the time Prometheus got to work on the humans, there was nothing good left. All the cool stuff had been given to all the animals. But he gave humans a loving heart and that they could stand upright, which is kind of nice, and a brain that could think at least some of the time. But Zeus had instructed these brothers that humans should be the kings of the world, and there was no way they could stand up against a tiger with just standing upright and being able to think sometimes. And so he got to thinking about what else he might be able to give these humans. And he thought, fire. That's the thing that could make all the difference. And so he asked Zeus, can we give humans fire? Fire that they can control and use as a tool? And Zeus said no. But Prometheus didn't really listen. And so he went up to the heavens and stole some embers from the forge of Hephaestus and hid them inside a fennel plant. Somehow, that's the tradition. I don't really know how you do that. But he carried it back to Earth and spent one night teaching the men, because there were only men at this point, they hadn't figured this out yet, how to control fire. And then Zeus noticed the flames and the fire, and that the fire that the humans had wasn't lightning strikes burning out of control, but hearths and cooking fires. and he flew into a rage. First, he took Prometheus and took him from Greece and sent him to the Caucasus Mountains, where he was chained to a rock, where every day an eagle would come and eat his liver, and every night his liver would grow back for thousands of years until Hercules came and changed it a little bit, but a fate worse than death. But then there were still all these men who had fire, and Zeus knew he could not take it away, but they needed to be punished somehow too. So, and this is a part of the story that I don't really love, he invented a woman, and he gave her in marriage to Epimetheus, the man who created all of the animals, the god who created all of the animals. And as a wedding gift, he gave her a jar. So I think some of you know about Pandora's box, but if you're going to be really scholarly about it, it's actually a jar. That's the translation. So a jar with a lid held tight on it and instructions to never open it, which Pandora and Epimetheus thought was a pretty terrible wedding gift as things go, just a jar to sit in the corner. And so they carried on. They created a life together, but one of the gifts that Zeus also gave Pandora when he created her, this first woman, was curiosity. Humans didn't have curiosity yet. She was the first human with curiosity. And so she kept asking, I wonder what's in that jar. Do you think we can open it even just a little bit and peek inside? And Epimetheus said, no, Zeus told us not to do this. But she had curiosity, and all these other humans just didn't understand what it was like to wonder and know and have that niggling question in the back of your mind that you can't resolve. And so one day, she decided that she was just going to open the jar just a little bit. And so she got it, and she pulled up the lid and looked inside, and all of a sudden, all kinds of things came flooding out. Swarms of pestilence, swarms of greed and jealousy and fear and anger, because none of these things had been invented yet. But here they come out. And then she clamps the lid back on, hoping that somehow maybe no one will notice, maybe it will be okay. And Epimetheus comes home and she explains what happened, although he had his suspicions. And they decide, it's already pretty bad. We might as well open it up all the way. And the last thing that was sitting at the bottom of the jar was hope. And so hope comes out and spreads across the world after the rage and the disease and the anger and the pestilences. Because humans, Zeus believes, needed to be punished for the fire, but they also needed to be able to endure those punishments. And I don't know if that's a trade worth having or worth making, curiosity in exchange for all of the things that are hard in the world. But it is one way of explaining the world that we live in that I think is a really interesting one. And that's our story. So people, oh, nope, we're not doing that yet. A different order in the summer. People support one another in good times and in hard times. One of the ways we do that is by taking time in our service to share the joys and sorrows and milestones of our lives. So if you have something you hope you want to share with our gathered community today, I invite you, if you are on Zoom, to type it into the chat box and it will be read aloud. I invite you, if you are in person, to come forward, place a stone in our bowl of water, and speak or not speak as you so choose using the microphone. If you want to just place a stone in the water without saying anything or have that placed for you, feel free to do that, or just type stone in Zoom. And I'm encouraging all of you who are here in person to please keep your masks on as you speak. And I will put mine on as well. People's people are generous people. At the congregational meeting in May, the members of this church voted to make our minimum wage a living wage for Kalamazoo County. And then they funded it with money to spare by the end, before our fiscal year began. And we did not know that then, but our longtime custodian resigned to take a job that is the job she likes better. And so we had to hire someone. And let me tell you, it is a joy to try to hire someone when you are paying a lot more than the prevailing rate for the area. So for our custodial position, we had over 65 applicants, which I tried to hire a custodian last year, and that was not the story, just for our weekend job. So anyone who tells you about a labor shortage, I think it's more about a wage issue. But your generosity made all of that possible, and we were able to interview several excellent candidates, and we're having someone start next week who you'll get to know as they are trained in and start doing the work. But thank you all. I did not know I would be so immediately grateful for your generosity, but it really made such a difference. So thank you for your commitment to our values. Thank you for your generosity. And this is the point in the service where I invite you to continue to be the generous people that you are. You know all of the ways that we give, that you can give us money. It's basically all of the ways that you can send money from one place to another. We will gladly accept it. And for those of you in person, we have some baskets. The offering will now be received.
Please join me in giving thanks for all that sustains us. For the countless gifts we each have been given, gifts of life and love and sustenance. We bring these small portions to share in the works of love, which none of us can accomplish alone. Our first reading is Ithaca. As you set out for Ithaca, hope your road is a long one, full of adventure, full of discovery. Laestrygonians, Cyclops, angry Poseidon, don't be afraid of them. You'll never find things like that on your way as long as you keep your thoughts raised high, as long as a rare excitement stirs your spirit and your body. Laestrygonians, Cyclops, wild Poseidon, you won't encounter them unless you bring them along inside your soul, unless your soul sets them up in front of you. Hope your road is a long one. May there be many summer mornings when, with what pleasure, what joy, you enter harbors you're seeing for the first time. May you stop at Phoenician trading stations to buy fine things, mother of pearl and coral, amber and ebony, sensual perfume of every kind, as many sensual perfumes as you can. And may you visit many Egyptian cities to learn and go on learning from their scholars. Keep Ithaca always in your mind. Arriving there is what you're destined for, but don't hurry the journey at all. Better if it lasts for years, so you're old by the time you reach the island, wealthy with all you've gained on the way, not expecting Ithaca to make you rich. Ithaca gave you the marvelous journey. Without her, you wouldn't have set out. She has nothing left to give you now. And if you find her poor, Ithaca won't have fooled you. Wise as you will have become, so full of experience, you'll have understood by then what these Ithacas mean. The second reading is Demeter's Prayer to Hades by Rita Dove. This alone is what I wish for you, knowledge. To understand each desire has an edge, to know we are responsible for the lives we change. No faith comes without cost. No one believes without dying. Now, for the first time, I see clearly the trail you planted, but ground open to waste, though you dreamed a wealth of flowers. There are no curses, only mirrors, held up to the souls of gods and mortals. And so I give up this fate too. Believe in yourself. Go ahead. See where it gets you.
And our third reading continues our modern engagements with the ancient Greek stories. This is from the play, The Cure at Troy, a version of Sophocles' Philoctetes by Seamus Heaney. Is there something I can do to make the feedback less? No? We're not sure. Okay. We'll just ignore it. Human beings suffer. They torture one another. They get hurt and get hard. No poem or play or song can fully right a wrong inflicted or endured. The innocent in jails beat on their bars together. A hunger striker's father stands in the graveyard dumb. The police widow in veils faints at the funeral home. History says don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. Call miracles self-healing, the utter self-revealing, double take of feeling. If there's fire on the mountain or lightning and storm, and a God speaks from the sky, that means someone is hearing the outcry and the birth cry of a new life at its term. And our next hymn is one that is not very familiar to this congregation. When you try to figure out the Greek myths or the polytheistic hymns in our hymnal, you don't get very far. But the lyric and the melody of this one were written by Norbert Čapek, who is the Czech Unitarian minister who created our flower ritual that we do every spring, and who was killed by the Nazis for his beliefs. So let us sing or let us listen, however you want to engage.
Yep, engage at your choice from your seats, please. Mother Spirit, Father Spirit, where are you? In the sky song, in the forest sounds your cry. What to give you, what to call you, what am I? Many drops are in the ocean, deep and wide. Sunlight bounces off the ripples to the sky. What to give you, what to call you, who am I? I am empty, time flies from me, what is time? Dreams eternal, fears infernal haunt my heart. What to give you, what to call you, oh my God. Mother Spirit, Father Spirit, take our hearts. Take a breath and let our voices sing our parts. Take our hands and let us work to shape our art.
Last winter, my children and I were searching for new books in the children's section of the public library. My now 7-year-old loves graphic novels, and so we were looking at those shelves, trying to find something new. A book about the goddess Athena caught my eye, and so we checked it out and read it, and it sparked a fascination with Greek myths for my child. We have since read all of the books in that series about the Olympians, so many others, and we've gotten now into Greek myths podcasts, so retellings in that way. Someone who knows more about child development than I do could tell me why there are certain things that capture the imagination of young children. So many kids have a dinosaur phase, a trucks phase, a princess phase, and at least a few have a Greek myths phase. I was one of them. Now my kid is. Maybe you were too, or maybe you knew another kid who really got very into that. I was so fascinated by Greek gods and the Greek myths when I was a young child that I still remember the Dewey Decimal classification for that and how I would run straight there in the library. And that is the only Dewey Decimal classification that I have committed to memory. It's 292, by the way. And so it's been wonderful to be along for the ride as a new child explores this. And it's been interesting to give these stories attention again for the first time really in decades. I think that is part of what parenting or aunting or uncling or having children in your life gives you, is that opportunity to return to different things. So I have some wisdom to share about this return. First, I thought I would have a little more time before I had to explain some of the elements of those stories. I fumbled to explain what adultery is, and rape, and what chastity is, and why the gods and mortals seem to care so much about it. And as I offered these explanations, I felt relief that my 7-year-old did not have to learn about these things from their lived experience, but could discover them in books and know that that is not true for every 7-year-old. And reading these stories prompted my child's first engagement with literary analysis. Why do authors tell the same story in different ways? The story of Persephone, goddess of spring, being kidnapped by Hades, god of the underworld, was one of my favorites as a child. And in a comic book retelling that I read with my kid, the author tells a version where Persephone wants to be kidnapped to escape an overprotective mother. And in the podcast retelling of Greek myths for children that's put together by National Geographic, which is really good if you have a road trip and need something to do, they share that all of the ancient Greek sources of this story describe Persephone as being taken against her will. And the more modern versions that change that are not rooted in the historical telling of that story. So we talked about that. Why would the comic book change that part of the story? Why is the original story so much sadder? Why do people want to change it, especially if they're making a version for kids? I know as a kid, I poured through all of the books in that section of the library, reading the same stories over and over again and looking at the differences. I didn't realize I was doing textual criticism, but that is what that is. I picked that up again in seminary, where they had us exegete, especially the Gospels, because many of the stories of Jesus's ministry are told in the different Gospels in slightly different ways. And so what are they trying to communicate? So why did the author tell a story in a certain way? What did the story mean to the first people who heard it? What does it mean to tell a story in a new way for a modern audience? Who has the authority to tell and retell a story and adapt it? These are the questions that I was, going to graduate school for, and now my 7-year-old is doing it for free. Did you have stories like this that you kept going back to? That you read and reread and watched every movie adaptation or television special you could find? My spouse at the same age was really into ancient Egypt. So finding all of that mythology and history, he was very disappointed to learn that the store Papyrus in the mall was not a collection of papyrus, but just sold greeting cards. Maybe you searched for every version of Sleeping Beauty or King Arthur. There's so many stories that capture us at that age. Years ago, a minister colleague, I can't remember who, said to me, novelty is not a faith development strategy, which means, and this is something I repeat a lot, especially with Diane as we're planning our worship life and our religious education life together. Diane, our director of religious education. And to me, it means that we need the familiar to grow spiritually. If every worship service was radically different with a totally different order of things, you probably wouldn't be able to hear the hymns because you'd be wondering what's happening next, or what's going to happen, or how is this going to end on time? We need to return to rituals and rhythms and stories that are familiar so we can absorb them and find the new layers of meaning within them. Most religious communities have central stories and texts and rituals that they return to again and again. Many Christians have a lectionary, so every 3 years, you hear the same text from the Bible. Our Jewish friends and neighbors read the Torah in its entirety every year. We return. And we, as Unitarian Universalists, believe that the truth is forever making itself known. So our central stories are collected more in a loose leaf binder that we can take and rotate things in and out, but we do have those central things. Our rituals include the flower service, the fire service, the water service that will happen in a few weeks, that we light a chalice at the beginning of most of our gatherings together, that we share our joys and sorrows. Our stories include the Buddhist story of Kisagami and the mustard seed, about how death touches every family. I tell that at least once a year. And the ancient Chinese story about the man whose horse runs away, where the refrain is, maybe it might be good, it might be bad, we'll see, which for me has become an especially meaningful text in this pandemic time. Those of you who have attended for a while know that there are stories and phrases and ideas that we just keep coming back to. If a story or a ritual is worth doing once, it is worth doing over and over again. It needs to be worth doing over and over again. We are here seeking community and seeking truth, which means doing a lot of the same stuff again and again and again. Diane Melvin, our director of religious education, recently told me about this image of a spiral of faith development, a model that describes how we circle around the same rituals, the same stories, the same truths, but each time we approach them, we are a little bit different. And so we experience something new in that, even if the water service this year is about the same as it's been every year for as long as we can remember, we are different, and so it means something different. I like this motion, this returning to what was meaningful and finding the new thing. That is why we tell a story, or we used to tell stories, and will again soon, with children and adults all in the service together, and know that if a story is good enough, it will speak to a 3-year-old and a 103-year-old and everyone in the middle. So my child interest in Greek myths was this invitation to spiral back and find new understanding in these stories and in the truths they hold. Most profoundly, I have a new understanding and sympathy for how the ancient Greeks made sense of their world. I'm a lot humbler now than I was as an 8-year-old, thinking, how can these people believe these wild stories are true? Because a lot of my spiritual work over the last few years has included coming to new understandings of how little I am in control of the world around me, and figuring out what it means to live with integrity in that truth. So given the events of recent years, a collection of deeply imperfect and often vengeful, powerful gods shaping life on earth could explain a lot. I don't believe that diseases are punishments, but I understand how people who existed before scientific understandings of viruses and illness and transmission could see people falling ill and create a story like the one about Pandora's jar. And as I read to my kid the story of the Trojan War, a war that began because 3 goddesses got into a fight about who was the most beautiful, and lasted for 10 long years because of all of the self-interested actions of different gods, I kept thinking about the recently ended US involvement and intervention in Afghanistan. That conflict began with one purpose that shifted to something else, a war that a series of presidents tried to end, but couldn't. And it ended with so many refugees displaced and far from home, like modern Odysseus's. I don't think Ares and Athena were behind this, but there are ways that that is a much more satisfying story than what I do know, that people, especially people with power, are deeply imperfect and usually overly optimistic. They cannot foresee the impact of their actions. And so this return to ancient stories has helped me wrestle with my beliefs about human agency and randomness. And this was an unexpectedly profound outcome from picking a book off the shelf and introducing my 7-year-old to stories I loved at his age. So that is me reflecting for a while. And so let's broaden this conversation. I'd love to hear what you think. So if you are on Zoom and have something to share, you can use the hand raise function. You can literally raise your hand. You can, gesture wildly until Melissa and Andrea notice, whatever works for you. And if you're in the room, you can either come forward and speak to the mic, or we can bring it to you. I encourage you to share your name so we know who is talking. And the questions that I suggest for sharing and listening are in the order of service. They are, as an adult, have you returned to stories that you first discovered in childhood? What did you find? Are there ancient stories that help you better understand our current reality? Why do you think some stories and ideas are ripe to be rediscovered by every generation, while others fade from importance over time? And do you have a story you return to again and again? And those are just suggestions. If you have something related that you want to speak to, we're not grading you on relevance to these questions this morning. So please share, and please keep your mask on if you are here in person.
Started, but let's say I got to get talking so that we can hear me. I'm going to be touching a tiny bit on the understanding our current reality from stories of the past, and how a particular story relates again and again that comes to mind. But what I want to end up with is trying to make the point that we all, as Reverend Rachel mentions, see stories differently each time. Or in the case I'm about to describe, it relates to a summer camp experience. And I honestly don't remember if it was Rick Maston, who has provided great music in our Unitarian world, or Robert Fulgham, who has provided great stories in our world, or Unitarian world, and the whole world. He's the one that did the books. Everything I learned in kindergarten, but I don't remember which camp it was. But the gist of it was, there was a horrible thing. The day the dogfish died, and all the adults were aghast at the cruelty and horrendous act of these kids that killed the dogfish. And all the kids were aghast at the horrible fact that they were trying to save the dogfish, and the adults are attacking them now. All throughout the afternoon and into the early evening, there were stories during the different events and at the dinner, and then at the inn gathering around 7 o'clock. By then, it was figured out. And so the dean of the camp and the speaker helped everybody see there were two sides of the story. And that's what I wanted to lift up today. Just real quickly, the lagoon was draining out, which was done occasionally, and the dogfish was stuck in the lagoon. And the kids were trying to get the dogfish stuck in the lagoon mug to the Hood Canal across the street. But things kind of got messy and the thing got dropped and then was blood. And they were like, oh my gosh, we have to put this poor thing out of its misery, is what was going on with these young teenage kids. So it wasn't they were trying to kill the dogfish, they were trying to save the dogfish. So it's how stories are seen. And of course, the point about the touching of current reality, it does kind of apply a bit, being a tiny bit political with all the stuff the One Network and Fox Network presents versus the other sides of the story. So thank you. Oh, Brian Lewis, sorry. I remember.
Hi, everybody. I'm Donna Kay. And like a lot of you, I fell in love with Clarissa Pinkola Estes' book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. In that book, she looks at fairy tales and the archetypes. And I still love that book. I love her so much that I named my cat Clarissa after her. And I think my favorite fairy tale, and the one that I go back to again and again, is The Ugly Duckling. I love that story, and I love the idea that we find our tribes, especially those of us that didn't come from particularly nourishing families, and how we go out into the world and find the place where we belong, and often finding the places where we don't belong first. So, I found my tribes in the recovery community, and I found my tribe here. So.
David Isaacson, it's storytelling time. I'm trying to keep all of this in some kind of order. It doesn't have to be. But first, Rachel, thank you for an insight, a re-insight for me into the manifestations of myths, especially the Greek ones, and Pandora being, kind of like Eve in the traditional biblical story. Good things come into the world when you have curiosity, bad things as well. So I'm going to go back for a second to the little story I told you earlier about the guru I met unexpectedly. He seemed almost destined to be in my life. Hasim taught me that Japanese Buddhist prayer, and I'm sure there's a Buddha story associated with it. So we exchanged insights, and one of the things he brought up was the Greek myth of Sisyphus. You may know this one. It's a rather despairing one because it seems to indicate that there is no hope in the world. We're not talking about Pandora. We're talking about a guy named Sisyphus. I don't know what he did wrong, but he was fated to roll this, not a rock, a big boulder up to the top of a hill. And he gets almost to the top. It rolls back down. And he has to do it all over again. It's seemingly a story of hopelessness. Well, there was a French philosopher named Albert Camus, who, among other things, wrote an essay called The Myth of Sisyphus. And in that myth, what Camus sees in it is a little glimmering, almost ironic, of hope. He imagines, Camus does, that Sisyphus, just as he turns with the boulder, he's saying, he's had all that work pushing it up to the top, and then only to see it go down again? No, what Camus says is Sisyphus has some agency, has some strength. Camus imagines him with a wry, ironic smile. Okay, I got to do it again, but I got the courage and the strength. I will do it again. I don't know where that comes in.
Hi, Pat Nelson. I guess what's really on my mind is what this brings up for me is how we don't have to be stuck in one story. And the Greek myths particularly spoke to that for me. I don't remember how I was first exposed to them. I wasn't 7. I was a lot older than that. But it was when I joined, well, first I should say, it was what was striking to me was what a different picture of the world that I had grown up with, and awful. I mean, awful. I get a kick out of Rachel saying she didn't like the part about Pandora, but Prometheus is sitting there with his liver being, chewed out, and that's just one example of just this horrible stuff. And I certainly think one of the real attractions was, though, you had these powerful women. And that was important to me at the time that I ran into it. I had a whole other twist on this when I was joining this church. We had a group called Feminist Perspectives, and it was at the time, this could have been going on for a while, and we just discovered it. There was a comparative religion professor that had written When God Was a Woman. And that's one of many texts we looked at in that group, and it was such a wonderful exploration of looking at earlier times when women had a different role in the society. And we revisited some of the myths. And the classic Greek myths, from this perspective again, look so different. Here you have Athena being bored out of her father's head. You have the snake, which had been sacred in the earlier religions that women had pretty clearly had more of a role, being crunched under the feet. And you see, though, in Greek myths, you still have the caduceus that came from that period that you still see in symbols of medicine. I've heard it speculated that the Greek myths were kind of a transition between the earlier religions and the older religions. And when you see Athena being born from her father's head, the attempt to deny even the power of the female in giving birth. So to look at these things, the same story is never the same. And it just had general implications for me in seeing that whatever story we're telling ourselves at any level, you can turn a corner and see it from such a different place. And it had to do with the power of stories. And I moved on from there to the power of literature. That's just it's just such a wonderful thing to have in your life. And it's so interesting. So kind of all over the place, but it just was, has a lot of connotations, more than I can probably share. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen Tinklenberg. What I remember was when I was in school, we read Great Expectations by Dickens, and I think maybe another Dickens story. As an adult, I have rediscovered those stories and just recently reread Great Expectations, and it was completely different than what I read in school. I think they must have abridged versions, maybe. I was in junior high when I read it, and this was like a lot more complicated. But yeah, I like Dickens, and as a result, I've been reading like one after another. I've started, I think, with Tale of Two Cities, and then David Copperfield, and Oliver Twist, and on and on and on. But I just enjoy reading them. I think He was an interesting writer. One thing about him is he was always kind of an optimist, because he would start out with a child, usually a person who was in the poorest of circumstances, and they would end up living, in a wealthy situation. But that's not really why I read it. Another thing is the Christmas Carol. We all go back to that every Christmas, and it always is touching, I think. It makes us realize how important our lives are, and how good they are, even though sometimes it seems bad. So, yeah, I like Dickens.
Thank you all for that sharing. We are now going to sing our closing hymn.
You can find it in your gray hymnal. It's number 318, I think. And I invite you to rise and bow to your spirit to sing together. We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love, to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other, to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which binds our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service, with love and justice strive to make us free.
So as we depart from this gathering, I send you off to continue your spiral journeys of turning and returning and rebinding and rediscovery, and all of those words that we made the theme of our summer services. Go in peace and go in love. Be well.